session, speaking us on involving the threat landscape as well as its solution. Over to you, sir.
Hi, welcome to the CIA conference for 2020. My name's Kane McGladrey. I am a CISSP. I'm also the cybersecurity strategist for Ascent Solutions, and I'm a senior member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. In today's talk, I'm going to be discussing the three most common cyber attacks and how each of us can deter, deny, and defend against those. What often happens with cybersecurity conferences is we all learn a lot, and then start to feel overwhelmed, and inevitably people then go back to work, or they get back to work, but nothing really changes. And so I want to leave you with a clear sense of purpose for what to do when you get back to work. For example, in 2019 and also in 2020, the annual cybercrime support from Cybersecurity Ventures predicted that global cybercrime damages are going to be $6 trillion annually by 2021. That's a trillion with a T, $6 trillion next year in damages. You don't get $6 trillion a year without multiple factors, which include breach fatigue on the part of the public, increasing economic attacks by nation states and criminal threat actors, an inability of people from my industry to effectively engage with people outside of the cybers, gaps in extradition laws, and really the increasing cost of businesses to comply with retroactive, well-meaning regulatory controls, kind of like our generals who like to fight the last war again instead of leaning into the fifth domain. Now, there have been some bright spots, right? Like Cybercom dropping North Korea's tooling on VirusTotal the day of the foundation of the Republic. But honestly, that's gallows humor, and it's not changing the tide. You're here because you wanted to learn about cybersecurity, right? No. I'm going to challenge you on that one. You're here because you want to build the future, and we all have a conscious choice about the future we're going to build. Do we want to see another hospital that's unable to deliver services and somebody ends up dying, like happened in Germany just earlier this year? Or yet another school that's paying a ransom so that they can open at the start of the school year? I've been in cybersecurity since before we called it cybersecurity, and honestly, in that time, things have not generally gotten better. It used to be that a nation-state scanning a power plant was first-page news. Last year, it was buried in the news, and this year and last year, the UN's calling for norms in cyberspace because, honestly, the threat actors have got shells all up in one another's utilities, and the risk isn't an intentional attack. Rather, it's like when an operator in Russia typed the wrong IP address and accidentally took down the Ukrainian power grid. Our threat actors are accidentally tripping over one another in our public utilities. Now think about this. When Target got hit, it was a big deal. And when Home Depot got shelled, again, it was a big deal. When Equifax lost the personal data for half the adults in the United States, that was a big deal. When Marriott got owned, a breach that affected hundreds of millions of citizens from multiple countries, you'd think that'd be a big thing. When a third of the internet was inaccessible for the better part of a day due to hacked DVRs and security cameras, you'd think there'd be changes. But every one of those businesses that I just listed, they're still in business. Their stock's actually back up. California is requiring device manufacturers to not have default passwords. But generally speaking, there's not been a lot of other movement to make things better, sufficiently better. And I hope you think like me, that that's just not good enough, that we can do better. That you're tired of another email from any company saying how your data are so essential to them and they care so much and they're going to offer you a year of complimentary credit monitoring. And sometimes that's actually a fake email. It's a phishing email, right? Or you don't want to see your organization to get owned and end up in the news headlines as being part of the latest breach data set. You're tired of your parents, your friends, your families having their personal data stolen, their privacy violated, or for them to be losing money to these threat actors, whether directly or indirectly in costs that are being passed on to consumers. And so let's talk about how we can build that safer future for our communities, because honestly, every one of us owns a part of this, whether we're an end user, a project manager, a developer, a security executive, or an analyst. Now, you go to cybersecurity conferences and presenters roll in and they show how they drop 0 days to get remote shells, right? And you watch the venture capitalists throw money at what they think are the problems they're going to have a good valuation. And you read news about the fear of Chinese manufacturers getting their 5G networks all up in our business and how that's going to give them really good telemetry. And you'd think those are the best exploits. No, I'd say the best exploits are the ones that work. And the best exploits today are the exploits that all target people. They don't target computers. Honestly, let's do the math here for a second. Why would you spend your time developing a bespoke 0 day that might have a 1 in 10 odds of working when you can just ask a user for their password, when you can literally send an email and get a few $1,000,000? Now, honestly, I will say this, if you're going up against APTs, good luck. They're funding that research into those O-days. However, if you're not going up against nation states daily, but rather you're going up against criminal threat actors of opportunity, this is going to be really salient for you to understand how they're attacking people. So the way credential harvesting works, just starting at the baseline, I'll say this: threat actors are not paying for a cloud hosting provider to host their malware. Instead, what they'll do is they will actually upload a phishing kit. And the funny thing about those phishing kits, they buy those phishing kits. They don't make those phishing kits. They don't make that anymore. You don't have to make that anymore. You can actually go out on the dark web. You can buy yourself a phishing kit. It usually comes with instructions. Then all you have to do is you have to have shelled somebody's web server. Funny enough, you can also buy that too. There's a whole supply chain here associated with the criminal underground, where if you want to do a phishing campaign, you can just spend a few dollars, honestly, and then you can roll phishing emails out the door. And you can do that either using a botnet, or you can just use somebody's compromised mail server. And then what's going to happen? People are going to get that phishing email. They're going to see it. They're going to say, oh, I missed my FedEx package. Oh, there's a new message for me in Teams. Oh, whatever the lure is of the day, right? And they're going to go to that phishing site that is on compromised infrastructure, and they're going to enter in their credentials. Now, they might even enter in a multi-factor authentication. They might not, but they're going to get prompted for their password. When that password is entered into that phishing site, here's where the threat actor starts to actually get something out of it. That is immediately sent to the threat actor, that password, and if they're using multi-factor authentication and if it's a sufficiently developed phishing kit, they'll also be able to use that to validate the account live. Now, sometimes the phishing actors, you know what they'll do? They'll go, you know what, we got a whole bunch of passwords, we got a whole bunch of usernames, right? We're just going to sell that too. Again, there's a whole supply chain at work here. Now, another way that they target people is, just think about this. Back in October of last year, AutoClerk, they had an S3 bucket up on the internet, and they leaked the details of 179 gigs of data for travel or reservations. Those included the travel plans for U.S. government and military personnel. So that included people like U.S. Army generals who are traveling to Moscow or Tel Aviv and many other destinations. And that data included their email addresses, their phone numbers, and other sensitive data like unencrypted login credentials. What's funny? Adobe, they're like, hold my beer. Less than a week later, they lost 7.5 million user records, including email addresses and the products that were used by the customers. Again, it was because of a misconfiguration. The threat actors know that misconfigured storage on the internet remains to be a problem, even though it's 2020 and even though we all should know better. So what happens is they will just use publicly available tools to scan for open storage on the internet. Then they're going to just use the same developer tools that if you're a software developer that you would use to configure that. So if you're attacking an AWS S3 bucket, you're just going to use a command line utility. And then depending on the level of misconfiguration, and this is where having configuration control management is so essential, what they're going to be able to do is they could change the access rights, or they could get a listing of the files, or they could actually write the files. That's an interesting scenario. That's how you can upload your self-efficient kit. Or they're going to download the files alternatively because the access model has been set up to be too permissive. And then, depending on what they just got, they could either steal the credentials, they could upload phishing kits, they could resell PII that they've obtained illegally. So there's a way that they're always, something to keep in mind here, they're always looking, how can I make money off of this? The cyber criminals, that's their kind of their day job, is they're trying to figure out how can they actually monetize these data. So the other way that we see attacks happen in the wild right now is what's called a credential spraying attack. And these ones are interesting because what will happen is a threat actor there shown on the left is going to use a botnet. Now, botnets are fairly cheap. You can rent a botnet. I wouldn't recommend doing that ethically, but they are available like anything else. If you pay money, you can rent the botnet. And you pay the botnet to simply use the same password against a massive user population, but you do it at a very low rate so that the clipping controls do not get flagged and cause those users to be locked out, or alternatively for your IP address or your configuration, wherever you're running this from, to be banned. So what the botnet will do, you see the password there is fall 2020, it's going to try it across all of those usernames. Now, most of them had really good passwords. However, that one user, Thomas Flores, who has the password of fall 2020, they can now use that account. If that's a banking account, they can resell that at a profit. If it's a PayPal account, they can resell that at a profit. If that's a corporate email account, they can probably sell that as a profit too, or they could use it as part of a business email compromise scam to be able to get even more money out of that affected organization. And then botnets will actually get those stolen passwords, picking on Thomas there with the fall 2020 password. They're going to test that password against multiple services on the internet, because if something we've learned, people tend to reuse passwords. A lot of folks in the infosecurity and cybersecurity community know you're not supposed to reuse passwords. And yet we've seen, statistically speaking, people reuse passwords. They also share passwords with perhaps their significant other or a partner or their kids for shared services like Spotify or like Netflix. So Recorded Future actually did a study on this. And they found that when a criminal goes out and buys a set of compromised credentials, they're going to get about an average success rate of about 1 to 3%. So for 1 million random usernames that they've run through their botnet against valid websites, threat actors for 1 million random usernames, they're going to get about 10 to 30,000 accounts that'll actually work. And then they're just going to sell those accounts to other threat actors. Now, bank accounts, of course, are a premium product. That's just an easy way to get money. But so are travel ones and retail credentials, especially retail these days, as it's easier to get the money out, right? Dunkin' Donuts is a pretty good example. They got hit twice. Threat actors logged into the DD Perks accounts and they used the coupons and the points for themselves, or they sold them. It was like the pizza plug scam, but with pastry. Moving up the value chain to account takeover, which is where you can actually take over another user's account. A basic package of information that's received as a result of an ATO typically goes for about $4 to $10. Now, if you get a more robust package of info that has, say, a victim's financial information and maybe some additional PII, like a driver's license or a passport scan, those usually go for a range of $30 to $60. So if you think about this, if you just start by buying some cheap usernames and cheap passwords that have already appeared in breaches, and you run it through a botnet, there's a pretty clear way to cash out on this. Threat actors know this. They are turning a profit based on this. So here's a view of those data I was speaking of, saying just on a 1% success rate if you're doing on 100,000 credentials that are for resale here, right? And there's a study last year from RSA. 73% of people admitted reusing their passwords. Funny enough, this is kind of controversial here, but it turns out baby boomers were the least likely to reuse passwords. Right? And Google also did a study, and they showed that 1.5% of all logins worldwide were reused. So if you spend about $150 for some software to configure your botnet, configure your credential stuffing kit, and then you buy a database of about 100,000 stolen credentials, $150. Of course, you'll have to pay that via Bitcoin or Monero or whatever the cryptocurrency du jour is. And then you rent yourself a botnet for about $250 a week. Now, those prices may have changed based on current market conditions, but it was about $250 a week when I last checked, right? If you run 100,000 credentials through that, right, assuming we get a 1% hit rate, you can actually get a gross profit margin of about 97.5%. And the maths are up there on screen, which is a really good profit margin for not much work. What are we doing? We're buying something, we're configuring something, we're renting something, and on the back end you get money. This is why the economics of being a threat actor, assuming you've got perhaps a different set of ethics than everyone who's attending this conference, if you've got that different set of ethics and you're motivated, you certainly can turn a profit, and that's what we are fighting against. So I hope that I've made the case that this is not the future that we want for persistent engagement from threat actors who are monetizing this. And, honestly, they're making money at this, which is why they're doing it. So if you're a person who considers yourself a developer, if you're creating applications, whether you're creating them on premises or you're creating them in the cloud, whether they're commercial or open source, doesn't matter. You've got a responsibility to your employer, but also I'd say you've got a larger, you've got a societal obligation, at least to the people around you, to make it harder for these threat actors to be able to operate. So one of the most effective ways to do that is to employ user entity behavior analysis. Now, a couple years ago, if you went to the conferences, you would have seen this term all over in conjunction with AI and ML, right? And if you went to the conference and you brought your bingo card, there's like 3 right there for you. Yuba is a feature. This is not a product that you buy. This is mostly common sense, but it's done at scale. Now, I normally work from Bellingham, Washington. So let's say I log into the same app about every day at about 7:30 in the morning from Bellingham, Washington. You could say that's kind of normal. So if one day I log in from Bellingham, Washington at 7:28 a.m., but then at 7:31 a.m. I log in from Moscow, that doesn't seem possible, right? That's an impossible travel scenario. You cannot get from here to Russia in 3 minutes. But if you think of how credential stuffing works, how it uses a distributed botnet to validate those credentials, it makes a lot of sense. Or let's say after I log in, I normally, I get on my email. I get on Teams. I might open up OneNote. It's sort of just a normal workday for me. What I don't do is I don't normally download a lot of files from SharePoint. But let's say one day I log in and I start downloading a lot of files, or I start modifying a lot of files. Hold up, that's weird. A person who's looking can see these things, but the problem becomes there's hundreds of thousands of log events, and then those are being created by our users real time. Or let's say normally I log in using a Windows 10 laptop and my Android phone, right? One day I log in using a jailbroken iPhone and connection from Firefox on a Mac. Again, those are signals that show, hey, you know what? Something's changed here. Maybe I got a new device. That could happen. But the point is, something's off. Something's changed that's an observable event. And this is where you're going to hear about black swan events of systems administrators logging in at 2 a.m. and getting locked out because they did something odd. You know what? If you think about this in 2020, how many of those have you heard? Because a lot of people are working a lot of weird hours right now. They're working from home. They're working from unusual IP addresses. They're working off hours because their kids need to use the computer to go to school during the day, right? We have not seen a lot of black swan events. And what's happening, thankfully, what happens when a user does something weird, a lot of the successful applications today are having them re-authenticate. They're having them prove the person doing the operation is the person who's actually associated with those credentials. Now, obviously, just asking them, hey, can you type in your password again? That's stupid because it doesn't work if you've got a situation where those user credentials have been compromised. So that's a feature I want you to consider building into your applications. Have your users have multi-factor authentication by default. Have it be something that's opt-out. not opt in, and please don't use SMS-based authentication. Now, somewhere out there, somebody's watching this and you're a product manager and you just thought, oh no, that's going to reduce market share. That's a terrible recommendation. You know what? Getting owned and disclosing a breach to your millions of users is going to cost you a lot of market share too. There's also an ethical issue here, right? If you're making it easy for your users to choose poor passwords, you're making it easy for those data to be stolen, which is going to eventually harm those end users. So if you're unfamiliar with how multi-factor authentication works, just really quickly, moving from left to right, the user is going to put in their normal username and their normal password into your app or your website. The second thing they're going to get prompted for is a second authentication factor. It's either something they have, that could be like an authenticator app that generates a number, or something they are, like a Face ID scan or a biometric scan like a fingerprint. The next thing that's going to happen is that then they get logged in. If they can meet that second requirement, they're logged in, they're able to go about their day. And I did say SMS-based authentication is bad. You know what? Go ask Twitter why this is bad. Y'all remember earlier this year where a whole bunch of celebrities were saying, hey, if you send me a little bit of Bitcoin, I'll double it, right? Or how many times has Jack at Twitter had his account get compromised and do weird stuff? The way this works is the threat actors, and in the case of that thing that just happened earlier this year, honestly, it was Discord kids who got the phone company to change the owner of the SIM card to them. So you go check out the prices at the OG accounts on underground forums, and you'll see bribing a retail employee at a phone store. Let's say you spend $300, right? It's going to get you thousands or tens of thousands of dollars in resale. Plus, you get the lulls because all of those are accounts where you can reset the account credentials via SMS. Or alternatively, I want you to think about the sheer number of Android apps that request permissions to read text messages, and the number of malware apps that are in the Play Store and third-party stores that exist solely to read SMS messages. That's why banks, especially banks in Europe, are moving away from SMS-based authentication. There are services that, if you're a developer, you can use for MFA. Honestly, pick the one you like the API of. I do not care. Just pick the API and pricing model you feel is best. And if you want to be super secure, support physical keys. But honestly, right now, for most of your end users who are not in a higher threat level, so your governmental officials, your whistleblowers, your civil rights folks, for those you want to have physical keys, but for the remainder, for your end users, most of them are just fine with a QR code-based multi-factor authentication for the near future. And now this is Google research I'm showing here about account takeovers. So an on-device prompt, like a multi-factor authenticator app, is going to stop 100% of automated attacks and 99% of bots. I want you to think about that for a second. This is a darn near guaranteed way to say, you know what, if we're going to do a prompt on the device that forces the user to put something in, almost got a guarantee there. Now, if you look at SMS, that doesn't look so good. It's only about 96% of bots and only 76% of targeted attacks or human-operated attack. But then if you go to something silly like just asking the user, hey, what's your phone number? It's a terrible idea. Or worse yet, trusting that their last sign-in location was good enough. Hello VPNs exist, right? So you've got to look at that and say, what is the easiest way that we can actually reduce our threats to our end users and our reputational damage as well as potential damages from civil suits? And you go, okay, you know what? Multi-factor authentication on a device works really well. The other ways that companies are consistently losing their data are through configuration management or mismanagement, right? You're developing an application and it tends to be, there's some error and you don't have enough time, and so you just run it as admin. And hey, look, there's no error, except that permission just made it into production. Or you assume that the service account that's used by your application, honestly, it just needs access to everything on your AWS instance, not some specific bits. So you just run it permissively. Or the API key, which is honestly used like a password these days, it never needs to change. Or let's say you can't update your underlying framework of the components you've got in production, even though there's a patch for a vulnerability in a third-party component, right? There are countless ways that an application can get shelled, and there are countless tools out there to find those permissions creep issues and those configuration issues and those out-of-date components. go ahead and pick one. Honestly, you can buy these. These are available. These are not on the dark web. They're commercial tools that will go out there and you just pay them a little bit of money, you run it on a weekly basis, and then you go, what? Oh, you know what? We've got some vulnerabilities. Go fix those. The more sophisticated ones are going to help you prioritize as a developer what's most vulnerable and also what's most at risk, so you can go fix it first. But honestly, please have something. We are past the point in human history where you can just go deploy code and forget about it. So we've seen how threat actors collect and then collate and then profit from stolen user credentials, and we've talked about how application developers can deter and deny those threats at scale. Not everybody at this conference here is a developer, but we've still got a responsibility to protect all of those around us because, honestly, nobody else is coming to save us. Reducing cybercrime is ultimately a community effort. First and easiest thing you can go do, set up multi-factor authentication for any accounts that support MFA. So at the holidays, help your relatives set this up, right? Go back to that Google study that showed well over 99% of automated account takeovers got blocked by multi-factor authentication. To do that, get yourself an authenticator app. I don't care which one you use. Honestly, the best one is the one that you're going to use daily, and you're not going to hear me say the name of a specific vendor here. They're all fine. What matters is that you use it, or what matters more is that your relatives use it and your friends and your company uses it. And then go off to twofactor.org. That's a free website. And follow the instructions for your bank, for your streaming media, for your email, for your social media. It might take you 30 minutes. Recovering from an account takeover, it's going to take you months. It's going to cost money. It's going to be miserable. This, by comparison, you know what? That's free. So also, if you work in a business that's using an online office suite, you can actually make the MFA the default for all of your users. And if you're a control framework person like me, that's actually one of your Center for Internet Security's critical security controls to have multi-factor authentication as a default for all of your end users. But not every website or every app supports MFA. So your second thing you want to go do, go get yourself a password manager or a password vault. Again, the best one is the one you use daily. I don't care which one. Get yourself a vault. Put a good passphrase on it and make sure you're taking a backup or that it takes backups or that it stores them in the cloud and it's secure storage. And then go change all of those passwords that you were reusing. Make them into miserable 24-character random combos of letters and numbers, and then just forget about them because the vault is going to hold those passwords for you. And if you work at a business, you can also implement a company-wide vault. There are solutions out there. That actually makes it a lot easier when an employee leaves because they didn't know their passwords, so there's less risk for data exfiltration or misuse. And then go out to Have I Been Pwned? It's run by Troy Hunt. It's a free service, and it'll let you know when your email address appears in a breach corpus. Again, this is free. And if you work at a business, you can set this up for your organization, and coincidentally, it's also free, and it will let you know when all of the users with your domain appear in a breach so that you can go tell them to change their passwords, which, if you read NIST, is one of those best practices for telling your users to change their passwords only if the passwords are known to have been breached. So at the beginning of this short deck, we agreed that things in the cybers, they keep getting worse. They're not necessarily getting better. And that's not good enough for anybody who's here today. So everyone here at the CIA conference owns a responsibility for building a safer future for our friends, for our families, and for our communities. So now that you know the threat that we face, the threat to our community, the threat to our economy, if you're a developer, please go incorporate MFA and user and user and entity behavior analysis and vulnerability scanning into your application, right? And if you're not a developer, go help everyone you know that you're going to spend time with over the holidays this year to set up MFA, set up a password vault, and set up notifications via Have I Been Pwned? So, thank you so much for attending. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm @KaneMcGladrey. My LinkedIn is up there as well as my own personal website. And if you'd like to